Fox News alert, the White House is announcing an overhaul in immigration enforcement. Word today, it will call for adding thousands of federal immigration and border patrol agents, and it focuses on deporting criminals who are already in the country illegally. All of it fulfilling a key promise from President Trump. This is Outnumbered on a fine Tuesday. I'm Harris Faulkner, here today, Sandra Smith, Meghan McCain, co-host of After the Bell on Fox Business, Melissa Francis, and today's hashtag one lucky guy. I changed my voice to talk about the co-host of America's Newsroom, Bill Hemmer, because he's all about it and he's outnumbered. Good to have you.
That's my Geraldo impression.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He usually kisses my hand. You don't have to do that.
So good to be back with you, ladies.
You come
Thanks
to play every time, Bill Hemmer.
All right, you feel like we have enough going on?
I think we're all right for now.
We're good, right? Welcome.
Thank you.
We will begin with the big changes to immigration enforcement, what the White House is calling improvements. New Secretary of Homeland Security, retired Marine General John Kelly, has issued new directives to fortify border security, add 15,000 ICE and border personnel, and speed up the deportation of criminal illegal immigrants. And that is not all. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is here. And John, this launches the president's brand new executive order.
Right, and that new executive order is expected to come toward the end of the week. This goes back to January the 25th, and you'll remember, Harris, the president signed two executive orders, one on improving border security, the other one on getting rid of criminal illegal aliens. So here's what these so-called implementation memos will do. They will call for the hiring of 10,000 additional immigration and customs enforcement agents and an additional 5,000 border patrol agents. It will also end the long-standing program of catch and release. This is where somebody comes across the border, they're basically handed a slip of paper and told to appear in court, and many times they don't appear in court. There will be a special carve-out, though, for unaccompanied minors, children who come across the border by themselves. It also restores the Secure Communities program, which means anytime anyone is arrested, not just a suspected illegal immigrant, but anyone is arrested and fingerprinted, those fingerprints will be run through an immigration database. It also prioritizes the removal of criminal illegal aliens, people convicted of any type of criminal offense, people who have been charged with a criminal offense that has not been resolved, people who have committed acts which constitute a chargeable criminal offense, even though they haven't been charged. This is really aimed at gangs and drug dealers, people who have abused public benefit programs, or people who are subject to a removal order but are still in the country. It also creates a Victims of Immigration Crime Engagement Office. It's the acronym VOICE. And in order to fund that, it will reallocate outreach and advocacy resources that are currently targeted to illegal aliens and switch those to victims of illegal immigrant crime. So that may be a bit of a controversial item. On the border wall, it immediately begins planning, design, construction, and maintenance of a wall using materials originating, to the fullest extent of the law, materials originating in the United States. It'll begin building in a few places where the wall is not very good right now. El Paso, Texas. It's landing mat fencing that they're using there now, and it's really obsolete. President Trump was at the Museum of African American History earlier this morning, where he gave us a few words on the implementation orders coming from DHS. Some of this is going to take time to implement. DHS officials were very careful to say this is not going out and rounding up a bunch of people right away. They don't want to create a sense of panic in the immigrant or illegal immigrant community. This will be sort of phased in over time. And don't forget again, Harris, that new executive order on extreme vetting, the immigration ban, should be coming down either Thursday or Friday of this week. And one quick question for you, Harris. What's landing mat fencing?
Landing mat fencing. Okay, so I know a little bit about this. Nogales and certain other areas have this because Meghan and I have homes in Arizona, so we understand this. It's sort of like suggested fencing.
Landing mat fencing is old helicopter landing pads that were used in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. It's basically corrugated or perforated steel that's been repurposed to use for a fence. It's old, it's obsolete. The DHS says that's what needs replacing first.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a suggestion because it doesn't actually really do anything as we know it. John Roberts, thank you for the pop quiz. And since we're making it personal, your hair looks fabulous, honey. Thank you. Let's move on. You got a new haircut. All right.
Looks
so
great.
Issue
So
yeah, we all agree on that. So I brought you up, so let's start there. We know this issue well. Talk to me a little bit about Arizona and what you've observed.
I'm not surprised at all. As we've talked about on the couch, this is by far the most emotional issue, at least that I've ever experienced living in Arizona. Nothing gets people out and protesting loud and long and intensely more than anything having to do with illegal immigration. Two quick things. The ending of catch and release, that's a really big one. A lot of people are going to be really happy about that. A big problem in Arizona and other border states are illegal immigrants being caught and then, let out to commit, some of them to continue to commit crimes. Also, Dreamers, the DREAM Act students. Right now, it appears many of these young immigrants brought to the country as children will be able to stay. That's a huge, huge issue. Very emotional, especially on college campuses. I am surprised. I'm surprised by this because it's a little more lax on immigration than I would have anticipated.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You've got your finger in the air.
I do, because there's an add-on to that we just heard from our reporter there, where he was talking about people coming over the border and unaccompanied minors, that they're going to have different rules for them. I'm worried about the incentive that creates. I mean, when you have a special
what do you think?
carve-out,
Do we know enough about what that carve-out would look like? What do you think it will look like?
Not necessarily. We're just hearing the first issuance of this.
Yeah, there was such an emphasis on anchor babies and even using that term. President Trump did on the campaign trail. I'm also surprised by this.
Yeah, so they're saying that, the enforcement rules are going to be different, in terms of sending people right back over the border, that if it's children coming alone, they're going to treat them differently. I mean, does that mean they're allowed to stay? And then that sets up an incentive to send children alone. So, I understand the compassion, but I'm just worried about what we're really talking about and the danger.
Real quickly, because I want to follow up with what you said, Megan, and then pose it to Bill if I can. So what you're talking about in terms of the program of catch and release actually officially ended in 2006. But as Megan points out, it's
still going on
back under the Obama administration.
It continued under the Obama years, too. I think this is a big deal today. I think there's a lot in this. I mean, you just think of the number of things that John Roberts just ticked off there. I remember the night when he was at the convention in Cleveland, Ohio, and he said, "I am your law and order candidate." These are all the ideas that he's been talking about. Then when he was at the, what was it, the prayer breakfast a week and a half ago, when he said, "We're going to build the wall, we're going to build the wall." People say, "You're not going to build the wall." Folks, I don't kid around. This is, for those who really support this president and say he's doing what he says, this is just another example of it. Jan Brewer, the former governor from Arizona, was with us today in America's Newsroom. And, all these questions and these points that you all are raising here. When I asked her, can you confirm whether or not a wall will be established by the end of his 4 years, first term now, she said, something is better than nothing. Is it?
Well, when you hear about helicopter landing pads being used.
Bill, when you look at the overall situation right now, obviously his base is pleased with what they are seeing and what they are getting. But this is the second time around. Is there going to be as much tolerance if this isn't rolled out in the best way possible?
I would suggest to you that this entire presidency will be measured based on results. And nothing else. And I know later in the show we'll get into Obamacare and tax reform and sanctuary. It's all about results. You can have as many press conferences as you like and blow up at people like us, but unless you're getting things physically done and enacted, none of this.
And it is seen that he is.
Real quickly, we haven't talked about Democrats and their reaction, right? And we know that
they can't react to anything yet, right? Let's see what happens, because they have jumped the gun.
He's also fulfilling campaign promises, and I think part of the problem with this issue, and I'm here to tell you, I have never seen protesting and the emotional reaction from people in any other issue except possibly abortion when it comes to immigration reform. And for a long time, I think the interpretation was that Democrats didn't care about national security, and they simply wanted open borders. And illegal immigrants that came here and committed crimes, like the young woman in San Francisco who was murdered by an illegal immigrant with a long criminal history. Kate Steinle. I think the impression was that maybe Democrats didn't care about this, and this is why the end result right now is this extreme turn to the right. And I just think this is the chickens coming home to roost for a long time.
Either they didn't care or they didn't know what to do about it, but they weren't talking about it when it came up on the campaign trail substantively, like the opponent Donald Trump at the time. Meanwhile, despite widespread media reporting of President Trump's recent crackdown on illegal immigrants, just a tiny percentage of the nearly 1 million on the government's deportation list have been arrested. The Washington Examiner reports, according to the statistics provided by Congress and ICE, the 680 illegals seized in recent sweeps, representing not even 0.1% of the more than 950,000 with deportation orders. And just a little more than 11,000, or 1%, are in custody. So how did the list get so out of hand, and how realistic is it to remove this many people? Now, one thing that we saw toward the end of President Obama's administration was a tick up in the deportations. And you would see these raids like on the down low. You wouldn't really see them talked about much in other parts of the mainstream media.
He would defend it, but I think you're right about that in terms of the coverage. My feeling is that with the sanctuary cities or the sanctuary counties, or
well, they're called areas of jurisdiction. Whatever.
My feeling is that you're going to get a lot of pushback on this. Yeah. And the cameras are going to be there to capture it, and it could get ugly.
We're already seeing it.
Yeah,
I mean, we're
right.
seeing people hiding out in churches, and we've seen this before. This is not new, but now it seems like, yeah, like magnets, that they have like lighting brought in. Like you can really get good visuals on this now.
It is so hard to sort the numbers when you look at who's been ordered deported, who has actually gone. I mean, I think one of the biggest takeaways might be that for people in this country, it has made them very furious when you have someone who's been here illegally and has continued to commit crime after crime after crime and is picked up and is then released or isn't handed over to federal authorities. And that's always the question, is if you knew this person had a repeat history of committing crimes, why were they not deported at that point?
And that's going to be their defense through all of this order.
Yes. Well, I think that's going to be the focus.
And I've had a question, because I mentioned 2006. That was George W. Bush who wiped away the catch and release policies by name as we know them, and then they crept back in. What changed? I mean, I know politically the differences between the men who held office, but what changed in this country to make that even palatable, to let that catch and release come back in such force?
Look, I think, as Melissa just said, looking at these numbers, these are daunting numbers. It's a daunting task. It's going to be tightly kept track of. I don't even know how you implement this, Megan.
Yeah, I mean, that's a $64,000 question, and there's still, I still have a lot of remaining questions regarding the wall, how long it's going to be, as you and I have talked about on the couch, Harris. Just the terrain in some areas of Arizona make building a wall almost impossible. So, listen, I was for comprehensive immigration reform. I'm for people joining the military, serving our country, and then becoming U.S. citizens. This isn't the approach I would necessarily take, but the American public spoke loud and clear. He came down. It's the first promise he made to the American people was immigration reform, and he's following up on his campaign promise.
So
all this is money, whether it's the wall or whether it's manpower. It's all about cost.
The CPB, or the CBP, the Border Patrol, says that they do have some funds allocated. They've got a 180-day deadline to take a look at where they can actually build a wall and get that started. DHS is in charge of that. So we'll see something in short order. I mean, that's not a long period of time. Okay, we'll move on. And a big event tonight. Martha MacCallum anchors a first 100 Days Immigration Town Hall from Jacksonville, Florida. And she will have a special guest, White House advisor Stephen Miller. He is now, we know, the author of the original immigration pause or travel ban, as it's been called, executive order that the White House is tailoring, replacing basically, and plans to reissue this week. So tune in tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, right here on the FNC. That's for the cool kids. Fox News Channel can't wait. The night is made. Pop some corn. Watch Martha. All right. President Trump has named Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster as his new national security advisor. General McMaster is more hawkish on Russia than Mr. Trump, reportedly, and feels very strongly about not turning the war on terror into a war on Islam. How will that relationship work? And they work together. Plus, thousands of people are protesting once again across the nation. You just heard it mentioned on the couch during Not My President Day rallies. Whether resistance like this or expression like this is actually helping President Trump. Stay close.
This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. 2, 4, 6, 8.
Fox News alert on President Trump's newly named national security advisor. Mr. Trump announcing Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster will replace Michael Flynn. He's a soldier scholar who fought in both Iraq wars, and he's going to remain on active military duty while he leads the National Security Council. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live in Washington. Catherine, please give us some more background on General McMaster.
Well, thank you, Megan. Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster is widely respected by Republicans and Democrats as a military strategist who challenges conventional thinking. McMaster is seen as an independent thinker who took the military establishment to task for their handling of the Vietnam War and later became a critic of how the Bush administration prosecuted the war in Iraq. McMaster is credited for turning the Iraq War around during its darkest period.
He's incredibly bright. He's very articulate. He's got a strong personality, and he truly speaks his mind. And he fights for his own ideas. It doesn't mean that he wouldn't execute his boss's policies if they were different from him. Of course he would.
Democrats like the fact that McMaster was not connected to the Trump campaign like former National Security Advisor Mike Flynn and appears to be less politically aligned.
I worked with General McMaster when I was on the Armed Services Committee and the Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense. We worked together on the issue of professional military education, that is, how we educate our troops and invest them with critical thinking in very challenging and complex strategic environments.
For his part, McMaster said it's an honor to continue his service under President Trump. Megyn.
You know, Catherine, General McMaster isn't exactly in lockstep with the president on some of the issues. Can you tell us about that?
Well, good point. The lieutenant general appears to be more hawkish on Russia than President Trump. In his current job as director of the Army Capabilities Integration Center, his job is to see the future where the Army needs to be in 2025 and beyond. McMaster sees Russia as a rising threat in that context because of its tactics in the so-called gray zone. That's the battle space between conventional war and peace. Republican Senator Tom Cotton told MSNBC this morning that he believes McMaster can navigate policy differences.
What General McMaster's role as the National Security Advisor is, and kind of in keeping with the best people have served in that role as an honest broker like Brent Scowcroft or Stephen Hadley, is to try to resolve those disagreements when they can be resolved at a level below the president. But if they cannot be, to frame those disagreements and make the president well informed with all the expertise that our national security professionals bring so the president can make the right decision.
McMaster also sees the war on terror as more nuanced than a war against radical Islam. Megyn.
Thank you so much, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I'm going to start with you, Bill. So I'm thrilled with this choice. General McMaster, he's a warrior and a scholar. He was one of the architects that helped us win in Iraq when the surge was still going on. I quite frankly, to be really candid, I think it's an upgrade from General Flynn.
Wow.
I do.
Wow.
General Flynn, there are a lot of concerns from people like me about General Flynn's relationship with Putin and Russia, and I don't have the same concerns.
Well, I tell you, I think, listening to John McCain.
Yeah, I know him.
Kudos. I know him.
Who?
Gave him kudos.
Yes.
I mean,
and if those two people can come together on something.
I think this is what we call a tough hombre, right? Little known fact, he was involved in the Battle of Tel Afar in Iraq, which was a tough battle. And he's one of those who invented the counterinsurgency plan. I mean, he strikes me as a protege of David Petraeus, and I agree with you. I think this was an excellent choice. And I think he, along with Katie McFarland, who used to be our colleague here, will do a fantastic job.
What about concerns that his vision is not in line with the president's? It's not the first time we've heard that with one of his picks.
He's picked some really strong personalities. It tells me he likes that. We'll see how they do, right?
That was about as politically correct as
I put him on the spot.
But here's why, because they're going to be challenged, and we'll see how they do. We'll see how they react.
I'll take that one.
It's not all a kumbaya moment down there. I think Trump is willing to be challenged right now. So let's see how they do.
I think sometimes you learn more from the dissension than you do from all that agreement. And part of the criticism for him up until now is that he's had cronies around him, and he probably needs somebody who would write a book about Vietnam called The Dereliction of Duty and talk about how wrong-headed parts of that war were, if not in total.
This guy's tough, man.
Yeah,
I mean, he played rugby at West Point, and on it goes.
But on point with what we have going on, he's really different. We had Operation Inherent Resolve start this weekend, which is the taking back, along with Iraqi forces and American forces, of Mosul in Iraq, that stronghold for ISIS, the savages there. It'll be interesting to see how he looks at that protection of it's not a battle against Islam as we begin to take it to the Islamic State.
He's also a student of what's going on in Russia, and I think that's very important, especially reflecting back on what you said about General Flynn. I mean, he's the one, he studied what has been going on in Ukraine. He studied Russia's new tactics and prepared a whole playbook on how the U.S. needs to change their operations in order to keep up with an answer to what is going on in Russia. So he may be exactly what the doctor ordered.
Keep your eye on this battle in Mosul, too. I know it's not on the radar for a lot of people right now, but Jennifer Griffin reporting yesterday that we have special ops involved in this operation. Perhaps not on the front lines, but based on the reporting near the front lines. If they have 3,000 to 5,000, which has been the projection of ISIS fighters, hold up in a city
it's more than that,
a city of 2 million, and it may be a city of 2 million. This is urban warfare.
Yep.
This is street by street, block by. This is Fallujah all over again, and and we could possibly pay a price here. But just watch the stories that develop and see whether or not the Iraqis.
And some criticism that it might be more like Mogadishu because we're having to fly those big helicopters in there to give some substantial support to our guys as they go door to door.
And we want someone like General McMaster in charge and advising our president. It's a complete and total home run. I was thrilled last night. Just saying. All right, it was one of President Trump's biggest campaign promises, scraping the Affordable Care Act. But are Republicans on the same page when it comes to a plan to repeal and replace Obamacare? Plus, the president's former campaign manager blaming Mr. Trump's staff for not preparing him enough for the presidency in these early days. But are they really at fault, or are there other factors at play? And after the show, you can join our live chat by clicking the Overtime tab at foxnews.com/outnumbered or go to facebook.com/outnumberedFNC. And of course, you can tweet us. See you there.
Hammer, you're staying.
The fact is, you want great schools for your children. You want good, high-paying jobs for yourselves and for your loved ones and for the future of your families. You want a health care system, and by the way, we are going to be submitting in a couple of weeks a great health care plan that's going to take the place of the disaster known as Obamacare. It will be repealed and replaced.
That was the president at his Florida rally over the weekend, repeating a frequent campaign promise, repealing and replacing President Obama's signature health care law. But with Republicans now controlling the White House and Capitol Hill, there are questions over when and how that will actually happen. Lots of mixed signals over the plan to move forward and who will lead the charge, while some Republicans worry about getting blamed if the replacement takes health insurance away from millions of people. Others, like Senator Rand Paul, are pushing for Republicans to go all the way.
Legislatively, I think we will repeal Obamacare within the next 1 to 2 months. I'm pretty sure of that. Now, there's a debate whether we repeal the whole thing or whether or not, some of the big government Republicans want to keep Obamacare light. The conservatives, we're ready for a fight. The House Freedom Caucus said they will not vote for partial repeal. I'm in the same camp. I'm not voting for partial repeal.
Because he doesn't want Obamacare light, were his words.
You're going to need the biggest Caterpillar machinery in the world, right out of Illinois. Listen, they set up their whole schedule. They told us what
Woodstock,
they're going to do. Is it?
I believe so.
Is it Caterpillar?
Major publicly traded company.
They said after President's Day holiday, they're going to get after Obamacare. And they said after that, they're going to get after tax reform.
Well, that was yesterday.
They've laid out the schedule for us. If you listen to Mitch McConnell's outgoing press conference before the break last week, he said, we're going to get it done. And he laid out the schedule, and he said, we're going to get the votes. This is ambitious.
Yes.
I know President Obama spent what would seem like every day for 10 months to get Obamacare passed when he held majorities in Congress as well. This is a big lift. They say they're going to do it, so we'll see. I think all of it comes back to the original argument. Results matter.
And Bill,
and the only thing that matters for this administration.
You always say money, that's where the rubber meets the road, is with the money. And that is the problem with this, and that's where he's saying Obamacare light. If you repeal the mandate and you also allow people to buy insurance that is catastrophic only, that starves the system of money, because those were the healthy people that were not paying in, but the original plan they were supposed to pay in that was going to support everything else. So how do you pay for the people with the pre-existing conditions? I've heard Speaker Ryan, I've had a couple people on the show to ask them, how do you do that? They're saying you direct the federal funds that were going towards subsidizing those healthy people that were buying insurance plans, and you target that.
Is there enough?
At the people. There you go. I don't know. I mean, we have really got to see the math. I don't know who has that math. What does it cost, and what's the federal outlay? And do we end up spending less as taxpayers or more in that new structure?
All right, so as we look through the political prism that it seems is focused on every issue that we talk about these days, would it behoove the people who have the most recent experience with failing at this would be the Democrats? Because what did President Obama show us? He didn't even go to his own party to make changes. He just did those changes, many of them, dozens of them, by executive order. So do you call them to the table? Do they come to the table on their own to get?
They don't come.
See, that is really a missed opportunity and a shame in all of this.
This is a battleground issue, though.
Take everybody to do what we need to do to go forward.
This is a battleground issue. You see all these Democrats taking a page out of the Tea Party playbook, going to these town halls and getting extremely militant, extremely loud. I mean, all you have to do is get on YouTube and see some of these videos. If Donald Trump, President Trump, and Congress can pull this off, all the political capital that he has spent in the first 30 days with the rocky rollouts of the executive orders, some of the missteps he's made, none of this will matter.
And then what do they call it, by the way?
I think they should call it Trump Care. I think he should own it in the way that Obama owned Obamacare. But if,
well, he didn't call it that. But, yeah.
Well, that's what I call it.
For the record, Peoria, Illinois, sir.
That's where Caterpillar is based?
I do believe that's what Hemmer said.
Megan, aren't you glad that the entire discussion of the Affordable Care Act and where it's going has come down to where Caterpillar is placed?
I think it should come down to Arizona because they had over 100% premium raises, and our state got hit the hardest.
Go get some Caterpillar.
Legitimately, though, what does happen to those people who have their pre-existing conditions and all of that? I mean, I still think that that's a question on the table that will have to be answered.
Definitely. Somebody's got to pay for it. That's what it comes down to. All right, a harsh critique of President Trump's staff from his former campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, who was fired back in June, don't forget. And he made the remarks during an interview with David Axelrod's podcast, The Axe Files. He was asked about what Axelrod calls a rocky start for the Trump administration. Lewandowski defends the president, and then he says this.
The staff has probably not prepared him as well as they could have or should have as it related to some of those executive orders and the implementation and what that would mean, particularly as it related to immigration issues. As I look at the totality of the senior staff, and if that's Kellyanne Conway, Steve Bannon, Reince Priebus, Jared Kushner, the senior staff inside the building, none of them have ever worked inside the government. And I think it's both a plus and a minus. You don't know what you don't know.
Sour grapes, Hemmer?
I don't take that as that biting a criticism. Boris Epstein was on us today at America's Newsroom from the North Lawn of the White House, and I asked him about Lewandowski's criticism, and he said, "Look, the president said we're running like a fine-tuned machine." And who am I to disagree? That's pretty much what he said. I think there were growing pains in every administration. I think the Obama team had it 8 years ago. I know the Clinton team had it in January of 1993. Heck, they had it all the way up until the spring of that year. So this happens. You figure out how you work for the man, and you figure out how you work around him and how he adjusts to you.
I mean, this has been the criticism, right? I mean, when you see other administrations come in, when it was the Clintons, they said, they brought everybody from Little Rock, and they don't know anything about running an actual government.
The growing pains of staffers on presidential campaigns are the stories that very bad HBO movies are made out of. This Donald Trump, total shades are very bad HBO movies. This isn't original. It's not unique. Corey Lewandowski changed the narrative, made it about him, as we all remember, during the campaign trail. He became too much of a distraction to work for the principal in the White House. My question right now is, there's still people that seem to be working for President Trump that maybe had their own specific agenda, their own personal agenda, not necessarily looking out for the principal. If I were President Trump right now, Steve Bannon is someone that I have some questions on. I think the buck stops at the president. It should stop at the main candidate. Again, it is far from unique. I'm sure this went on when President Lincoln was running for president at the same time. But this staff, the point that Corey Lewandowski is making about the young staff is a legitimate one. I do still think there are some people, and we've talked about this on the couch at length, that he could use some help with his narrative by people who have gone and
you say that there are people that are at his side that he is not using.
Sarah Huckabee being number one of them. I really think there are some people that I know working in his administration. I know there are people working in his administration that would possibly do a better job, especially when it comes to communicating with the American people that he has in place at this moment, or at least a larger platform.
So Sarah Saunders, I think, is her last name, right?
Huckabee Sanders, correct.
Yeah, she came out. She did the off-camera gaggle, and so obviously somebody's listening to you. I'm really a basic girl. Is Corey Lewandowski looking for a job now with this administration?
He may get another crack at that. My impression of how things are working now is that Trump is such a dynamic and dominating character, is that the staff is waiting for him to sign off on far too many issues of the day. And the more you can delegate, the more you trust the people around you, the more
well, trust is the key, though, right?
The machine will run. That's my impression.
But one could easily argue, running a business like he has for most of his life, he knows how to do that.
I'm not suggesting he doesn't, but I mean, this is a whole new animal.
Yeah.
And as Lewandowski said, until you've been in there, you don't know what you don't.
It's not about the job necessarily, but it is about the spin. And as we've talked about on this couch, there are people who go on TV and represent President Trump who, again, I think they take the narrative and take it to a place that it doesn't necessarily need to go.
Interesting. All right, we'll keep an eye on that. During what's supposed to be a patriotic holiday, thousands of protesters taking part in what was billed as Not My President's Day rallies. That's so nice. But could all this resistance to President Trump actually be helping him?
Not everyone was celebrating yesterday's patriotic holiday. Thousands of protesters taking to the streets in cities nationwide for what was billed as Not My President's Day rallies. Just the latest display of opposition to President Trump. Meantime, liberal filmmaker Michael Moore, who's called for Mr. Trump to be removed from office, now launching an online resistance calendar to track anti-Trump events worldwide, along with protests against other Republicans. But the New York Times recently asking if all this resistance could actually help President Trump. The article saying, quote, protests and righteous indignation on social media and in Hollywood may seem to liberals to be about policy and persuasion, but moderate conservatives say they are having the opposite effect, chipping away at their middle ground and pushing them closer to Mr. Trump. So, Bill, this is happening to me. I have to tell you, liberals are endearing me to Trump a little bit more. I'm going to give you an example. Over the weekend, the director, Judd Apatow, it makes me very protective of Trump supporters and Republicans in general. The director, Judd Apatow, said over the weekend that he felt, quote, raped after the election. Statements like that coming straight out of Hollywood, it makes me extremely protective of Donald Trump and his supporters.
Did you work yesterday? I worked yesterday.
I did work yesterday.
You did?
Yes.
I was
away. Yes.
3 or 5. Listen, nobody was working yesterday in New York. Everything was closed. Joint was like a ghost town. Don't tell the boss.
Okay.
I go up to the Upper West Side to get my shoulder worked out.
Joint was like a ghost town?
Joint was like a ghost town. Don't tell the boss. I got caught up in that rally. And I'm telling you, there were thousands of people. School was out. You know, a lot of people were off work. It wasn't an easy day to have a rally, but it was pretty easy. Signs as far as the eye could see. Here's my feeling. When you don't have any power, the only power you have is that of resistance. If Democrats had the House or the Senate, one or the other, you would not be seeing this. Since they don't, for a minimum of 2 years, you're going to see a lot more of it.
But why didn't we see this kind of energy and enthusiasm for Hillary Clinton then? I mean, if these people are so upset, which I completely understand, then why were they not able to mobilize and win?
Because this is about something they are resisting, as you just put it.
Yes.
I'll use your word.
They really
and that was
do not like
that
President Trump.
Run for the White House that she was forging, if you drill down into a lot of the polling, was not for her. I mean, she wanted them to be with her, but they were not for her. They are actually against something. So they were much more motivated to come out on Sunday. I worked.
Than to come out.
How many of you worked on Sunday since we're taking that right? And I walked through I Am a Muslim Too rally through Times Square to get to our building here, which was equally as big. And so, I mean, they're against something. They're dedicated to it. I just don't think they were that dedicated.
My feeling is there is no cohesion in the resistance. What I mean by that is there is not a consistent theme other than they don't like the results of this election because every sign is different.
That seems to be enough to get them together.
Well, and that's been part of the criticism of Democrats, right? They're not picking their battles. They're not picking their fights. So you really don't know when they're really angry about something. But Megan, going back to you, so what influence is this having on you?
Well, I was in Los Angeles over the weekend to do something totally different. And, you know, when you're a Republican and you go to places like L.A., you know, I feel like I have to explain Trump's win because they're so, no disrespect, disconnected from the election. And the vitriol and anger and sort of ignorance directed towards Donald Trump and his supporters, everyone knows I have my issues with Donald Trump and his administration with his ideology, but I am giving him a fair shot. And I think the idea that you're going to say things like you feel, quote, raped after the election, like Judd Apatow does, yes, it makes me very protective and it makes me endear myself in a way to Donald Trump that he hasn't been able to do. So Democrats and liberals, I'm living proof it's the effect you're having.
But so many Democrats have said to me, I can't believe anyone would vote for Donald Trump. And I know you can't believe that. I know Democrats can't believe anyone would vote for him. I understand that you can't even believe it. You can't connect in your mind what they are thinking. You don't empathize. You don't
can't believe they lost to anybody.
You don't have any sort of comprehension that people were fed up with this whole idea of Washington doing nothing, of the middle class being left behind, of
Where do they
working
live?
and not getting anywhere. All these people on the Upper West Side.
All right, we got to move on. All right, Hillary Clinton's former campaign manager appears to be still struggling with why his candidate lost, who he's still blaming for Clinton's loss more than 3 months later. Is it time to let it go, or is it more serious than that? We debate.
Here comes Frozen.
Well, some people still rejecting the notion that President Trump won the election fair and square. More than 3 months later, former Clinton campaign manager Robbie Mook saying Russian interference may be to blame for his candidate's loss. One day earlier, he echoed those comments with the same sentiment.
The problem is that Vladimir Putin devastates and destroys his enemies. He's been devastating and destroying the Syrian people, and Hillary Clinton spoke out against that. She had the courage to do that, and she paid a price because Vladimir Putin interceded in this election.
If I had a nice enough singing voice, I would recite the words of Frozen for you, let it go. But it doesn't seem like he
I don't think
and
they
many
will.
Democrats will let this go.
I agree. I don't think they will. I honestly don't know where it goes. I know that's not a great answer, but I don't have a crystal ball. My feeling is that when President Trump and President Putin meet, that will be. That will be something else. I think he's going
to meet where our cameras can see it.
Yeah, exactly. When they have they're going to have their summit.
Yeah.
I know he's going to England, I think, to London in May, I believe, and some members of Parliament are, rejecting his visit there, and they've talked about going to the countryside. I think that'll be anticipated as well. But the Putin/Trump meeting will be arguably
a game changer?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if it'd be a game changer or not, but my feeling is when that meeting is established, you can circle it on the calendar.
But just going back to why is that discussion still taking place, Megan?
Because Robbie Mook needs a job, and as long as you don't take responsibility for the fact that you sent Lena Dunham to North Carolina to campaign for you instead of Bill Clinton, after Bill Clinton told your staff that you should be paying more attention to battleground states, maybe that's your problem. She ran a horrible campaign. There are many questions to talk about with Russia. That's not the point, specifically with him. People like that, you're associated with a losing campaign. The way that she lost this election will be analyzed for decades and decades and decades. She lost arguably an losing election. And again, he needs a job someplace, and the best thing he can do is continue blame shifting someplace else.
I mean, it also doesn't matter. I mean, after how many elections have we watched when Republicans have lost, and afterwards you're sitting there criticizing the other side and saying what President Obama is doing wrong? No one really cares because President Obama won. You can't change the outcome. So I guess that's my point. No matter how much they sit there and talk about what an impact it has, it doesn't change the outcome. He still won. There's no taking it back.
So I often point to what Sandra has said, and I think you're so right about this. It's hard to figure out what Democrats are truly upset about, because are they upset because they lost and they want to point to a reason, or do they legitimately think that the Russians were somehow, the Russian government interfered and hacked, and what we do know to be factual about any of that, are they not concerned more about that? And that would have more of an investigative movement rather than this backbiting. So I'm confused. What are they really upset about? And by the way, extra revenue. We could rent out portions of our homes as safe spaces for these people who just cannot. And I'm joking because I want to live with just my family. But if they can't move forward, then they need to make it purposeful. Yeah. So what does that look like?
At the moment, so much of this is theoretical, and it's going to stay that way until the Senate gets us some answers or some direction.
I'm glad I was right about something and that you pointed that out, because I was wrong about the town in Illinois in which Caterpillar is based. And Bill Hemmer said it, and he said it correctly. I didn't hear him. So congrats.
It's okay, kid.
Well, where
we'll
is
be right
it?
Back.
Is it Peoria?
Peoria.
Oh, okay. All right, your night is made. A special edition of The First 100 Days airs in just a few hours. Martha MacCallum will be in Jacksonville, Florida, where she will anchor a town hall on immigration, certainly one of the biggest issues facing our nation right now. We've talked a lot about it this hour. That is at 7 p.m. Eastern right here on Fox News Channel, and you'll see a little countdown on some of the shows throughout the day, just letting you know how close you are to that event. Bill Hemmer? Yeah. You've made an event of your own just by being here.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you.
Check out Martha tonight. Martha left me. How about that?
She just took a pause. You're going to be around online, right? FoxNews.com/outnumbered.
Right.
Click the Overtime tab, or on Facebook Live, Outnumbered FNC. Happening now.